when 38-year-old Jennifer Caldwell saw the Phoenix tattoo on the forearm of a biker filling his gas tank at a Chevron station outside Sacramento on a Thursday afternoon in mid-October, her entire world stopped. That exact design, that specific arrangement of flames and feathers, had been inked on her father's arm 3 decades ago by an artist who died years back, making it impossible to replicate. Her father, David Caldwell, had been killed in a motorcycle accident when Jennifer was 8 years old, and she'd spent 30 years believing she'd lost every connection to the man who'd been her whole world. But the impossible image on this stranger's arm would unravel a secret her mother had kept for 3 decades, reunite Jennifer with a brotherhood that had never forgotten David's daughter, and prove that some bonds survive even death and deliberate separation. The Chevron station sat at the junction where Highway 50 met the outskirts of Sacramento, a place where suburban sprawl gave way to foothill country and the Sierra Nevada mountains rose in the distance. It was 2:47 in the afternoon on a Thursday in mid-October, the kind of perfect California fall day where the sky was painfully blue and the temperature hovered in the low 70s. The station was moderately busy with commuters heading home early, retirees running errands, delivery drivers making their routes. Jennifer had stopped for gas on her way home from a doctor's appointment in Sacramento, pulling her Honda CR-V up to pump 6 and stepping out to fill her tank. She was 38 years old, a middle school teacher in Placerville with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and a face that showed the stress of managing teenagers all day. She wore jeans and a cardigan over a t-shirt, sensible flats, the uniform of a woman who'd built a careful, controlled life that didn't include surprises or disruptions. She was standing at the pump waiting for her tank to fill, staring at nothing in particular, when the motorcycles pulled in. 3 of them, Harley-Davidsons with deep rumbling engines that announced their presence before they were visible. The bikes rolled up to the pumps on the opposite side of the station, and 3 men dismounted. Older bikers, probably in their 60s, wearing black leather vests covered in patches and pins that told stories Jennifer couldn't read from this distance. She glanced at them with the kind of brief attention people give to strangers who are slightly outside their normal experience. Bikers, leather, tattoos, different from her world but not threatening. Just there. She was turning back to her pump when one of the men pulled off his riding gloves and reached for the gas nozzle, and that's when Jennifer saw it. The tattoo on his right forearm, a phoenix rising from flames, wings spread wide, rendered in spectacular detail with oranges and reds and golds that seemed to glow even in the afternoon sunlight. But it wasn't just any phoenix. It was that phoenix, the exact design her father had worn on his right forearm, the same placement, the same size, the same impossible specific details that she'd memorized as a child when she'd traced the lines with her small fingers, while her father told her stories about rising from ashes and starting over. Jennifer's vision narrowed to that single image. Her breathing stopped. Her hands went numb. The gas pump clicked off behind her, finished filling, but she didn't move. She just stared at that tattoo with the kind of intensity that came from seeing something that shouldn't exist, something that violated the rules of reality as she understood them. The biker must have felt her staring because he looked up and met her eyes across the pumps. He was maybe 62 or 63, tall and broad-shouldered with a gray beard and weathered skin that spoke of decades in the sun and wind. His eyes were blue and sharp, the kind that didn't miss much. He gave her a brief nod, the acknowledgement strangers gave each other in public spaces, and returned to filling his tank. But Jennifer couldn't move, couldn't look away. That tattoo, that impossible tattoo, her father's tattoo. She'd seen it 1,000 times in her childhood, had asked him about it, had been told the story behind it. Her father had gotten it after he survived a bad accident when he was younger, before Jennifer was born. The artist who'd done it was named Carlo, an old-school tattoo legend who'd worked out of a shop in Oakland and who died in 1997. Her father had told her that Carlo never repeated his designs, that every piece was unique, that this phoenix was one of a kind. So how was this stranger wearing it on his arm? Jennifer's heart was hammering now. Her hands were shaking. She needed to know, needed to understand. She pulled the nozzle from her tank, replaced it in the pump, and before her rational mind could talk her out of it, she was walking across the station toward the biker. "Excuse me," her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Excuse me, sir." The biker looked up again, this time with more attention. His two companions, who'd been chatting while they fueled their own bikes, turned to look at her as well. Three sets of eyes, weathered and cautious, taking in this middle-aged woman in a cardigan who was approaching them with an expression they probably couldn't decipher. "Yeah," the first biker said. His voice was gravelly, careful. "Can I help you?" Jennifer pointed at his arm, at the phoenix that was making her reality fracture. "That tattoo. Where did you get that tattoo?" The biker glanced down at his forearm like he'd forgotten what was there. "This one? Why?" "Because my father had that exact same tattoo, same design, same placement, everything, and the artist who did it died 27 years ago and never repeated his work. So I need to know how you have it." The three bikers exchanged looks, something passing between them that Jennifer couldn't interpret. The first biker's expression shifted from neutral caution to something that looked like recognition mixed with concern. "Your father," he said slowly. "What was your father's name?" "David. David Caldwell. He died 30 years ago in a motorcycle accident. He was a member of the Sierra Kings MC." Jennifer's voice cracked slightly. "He was my whole world, and I lost him when I was 8 years old." The biker with the phoenix tattoo went absolutely still. The color drained from his face. His two companions both stepped closer, their body language shifting from casual to protective, surrounding their brother like they sensed he needed support. "David Caldwell," the biker repeated. He looked at Jennifer with an intensity that was almost painful. "Hammer's daughter. You're Hammer's daughter." The road name hit Jennifer like a physical blow. Hammer. Nobody had called her father that in 30 years. Her mother had forbidden it, had insisted on calling him David, had erased every trace of his motorcycle club life from their home after his death. But Jennifer remembered that name, remembered the way his brothers had called it out in greeting, the way it had been written on cards and letters that her mother had thrown away. "You knew him," Jennifer said, and it wasn't a question. "You knew my father." The biker nodded slowly, his eyes shining with something that looked like tears he was fighting to control. "I'm Thomas Reed. Road name Torch. I was your father's best friend for 11 years. We were brothers in the Sierra Kings. I was riding with him the night he died." The ground seemed to tilt under Jennifer's feet. She'd spent 30 years with fragments of information about her father's death, a motorcycle accident on a mountain road, another vehicle involved. Her father died instantly. That was all her mother would tell her. That was all she'd been allowed to know. And now, here was a man who'd been there, who'd witnessed it, who'd known her father as an adult and an equal rather than just as a parent. "The tattoo," Jennifer managed to say. "Why do you have his tattoo?" Torch looked down at his arm again, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "After Hammer died, 5 of us went to Carlo together. We all got matching phoenix tattoos in the same placement, same design as Hammer's original. Carlo said he'd never repeat a design, but when we told him the story, when we explained we wanted to carry our brother forward, he agreed to do it one time. 5 phoenixes for 5 brothers who wanted to make sure Hammer's mark stayed in the world." He touched the tattoo gently. "I've been carrying your father with me for 30 years. Jennifer felt tears streaming down her face. 5 of you. 5 brothers got my father's tattoo. Yeah, me, Bear, Copper, Snake, and Wheels. The original Sierra Kings who rode with Hammer from the beginning. We wanted you to have one too when you were old enough. We wanted to make sure you knew your father's legacy." "But your mother?" Torch stopped, choosing his words carefully. "Your mother made it very clear we weren't welcome in your life. She cut us off completely after the funeral." Jennifer's world was reorganizing itself around this new information. Her mother had always told her that her father's motorcycle club friends had moved on, had disappeared, had forgotten about David and his daughter. But that had been a lie. They'd wanted to stay connected. They'd been pushed away. "She wouldn't talk about him," Jennifer said quietly. "Mom wouldn't talk about Dad or the club or anything to do with motorcycles. She threw away all his stuff, all his photos, everything. She said it was too painful, that we needed to move forward. I spent my whole childhood feeling like I was forgetting him, like I was losing the memory of who he was." Torch's jaw tightened. "We tried to stay in touch. We sent letters, cards on your birthday, Christmas presents. We wanted to be part of your life. We promised Hammer we'd look after his daughter if anything ever happened to him. But your mother returned everything unopened. Eventually got a lawyer to send a cease and desist letter saying we were harassing her. We backed off because we didn't want to make things harder for you." One of the other bikers, a massive man with a shaved head and a beard that reached his chest, spoke up. "I'm Bear. Your dad and I served together in the Navy before we ever got into motorcycles. He saved my life once in a bar fight in San Diego, took a knife meant for me. I owed him everything. When he died, leaving you behind, it killed us that we couldn't be there for you the way we wanted to be." The third biker, lean and wiry with copper-colored hair going gray, nodded. "I'm Copper. I was the one who taught your dad to ride. He was a natural, fearless, but smart. He talked about you constantly, carried your picture in his wallet, planned his whole life around being the best father he could be. Losing him was losing a brother. But losing you, losing the chance to tell you about him, that was almost worse." Jennifer was crying openly now, 30 years of questions and loss and deliberate ignorance crashing over her. "I don't understand why Mom did that, why she cut you all off, why she wouldn't let me know you." Torch's expression was complicated, pain and old anger, mixing with something that looked like understanding. "Your mother blamed the club for your father's death, blamed motorcycles, blamed us, blamed the lifestyle. She thought if she could erase all of it, she could protect you from the same fate. She couldn't save Hammer, so she saved you by keeping you away from everything he loved." "But he loved me too," Jennifer said, her voice breaking. "And I needed to know him. I needed people who could tell me about him, who could help me remember." "We wanted to be those people," Bear said gently. "We still want to be those people, if you'll let us." Jennifer looked at these three men, strangers who weren't strangers, who carried her father's image on their arms, who'd spent 3 decades wanting to know her. She thought about the careful, controlled life she'd built, the life her mother had insisted on. A life that was safe and predictable and completely disconnected from the man who'd given her life. "I want to know everything," Jennifer said. "I want to know about my father. I want to hear the stories Mom wouldn't tell me. I want to understand who he was beyond the 8 years I got with him." Torch nodded slowly. "Then we'll tell you. Everything. But not here in a gas station. This conversation needs time and space." He pulled out his phone. "The Sierra Kings still meet every Sunday at our clubhouse in Auburn. It's the same place we met when your father was alive. Most of the original members are still around, still riding. They'd all want to see you, want to tell you about Hammer." Jennifer's hands were shaking as she pulled out her own phone. "Give me the address. I'll be there." Torch gave her the information while Bear and Copper watched with expressions that suggested they were witnessing something significant, something that had been broken for decades, finally starting to mend. Before Jennifer left, Torch reached into his saddlebag and pulled out his wallet. From inside, he removed a photograph, protected in a plastic sleeve, worn at the edges from years of handling. "This is from 1993, Torch said, handing it to Jennifer. "A year before your dad died. That's all of us at a run to Lake Tahoe." The photograph showed 7 men standing beside their motorcycles, grinning at the camera with the lake sparkling behind them. And there in the center was her father, younger than Jennifer's memory of him, but unmistakably David Caldwell. Hammer. He had his arm around Torch's shoulders, his phoenix tattoo clearly visible on his forearm, his smile wide and genuine. He looked happy. He looked alive in a way that transcended just breathing and existing. He looked like a man who'd found his people, his purpose, his place. Jennifer stared at that photograph and saw her father not as the parent she'd lost, but as the man he'd been. The friend, the brother, the member of a community that had valued him and mourned him and carried him forward for 3 decades. "Can I keep this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Torch smiled. "I've got copies. That one's yours." Jennifer drove away from that gas station with the photograph on her passenger seat and a Sunday appointment that felt like it might change everything. She called in sick to work the next day, unable to focus on anything except the revelation that had shattered her understanding of her past. And on Friday afternoon, she drove to her mother's house in Folsom, walking in with the photograph in her hand and 30 years of questions that demanded answers. Jennifer's mother, Carol Caldwell, was 66 years old now, a retired bank manager who lived alone in a tidy ranch house with a manicured lawn and nothing out of place. She answered the door with a smile that faded the moment she saw her daughter's expression. "We need to talk," Jennifer said, walking past her mother into the living room she'd known her entire life. A living room that had never contained a single photograph of her father, never displayed anything that suggested David Caldwell had existed beyond a name on Jennifer's birth certificate. Carol closed the door slowly, her face going carefully neutral in the way it always did when she sensed conflict. "What's wrong?" Jennifer set the photograph on the coffee table, the image of her father and his brothers facing up. "I met some of Dad's friends yesterday, his Sierra Kings brothers. They told me you cut them out of my life, that they tried for years to stay connected and you refused to let them." Carol looked at the photograph and something crumpled in her face. "Where did you get that?" "From Torch. Thomas Reed, Dad's best friend. The man who was riding with him the night he died. The man you sent a cease and desist letter to when I was 10 years old." Carol sat down heavily, her hands shaking. "I did what I thought was right. I did what I had to do to protect you." "Protect me from what? From people who loved Dad? From people who wanted to tell me about him?" Jennifer's voice was rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "You told me they forgot about us. You told me they moved on. But that was a lie, wasn't it? They didn't forget. You pushed them away." Carol's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. You were 8 years old. You didn't see what I saw. Your father died on that motorcycle doing something reckless and dangerous with those men. They encouraged him. They enabled him. And I was left alone with a daughter to raise and a husband in the ground." "So you erased him," Jennifer said. "You threw away his things. You refused to talk about him. You kept me from the people who could have helped me know who he was. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I spent my entire childhood feeling like I was losing my memory of him, like he was slipping away and I couldn't hold on. I thought if I could separate you from that world, you'd be safe." Carol was crying now, but Jennifer felt no sympathy. "I thought if I could keep you away from motorcycles and clubs and that lifestyle, you wouldn't end up like your father, dead at 36 and leaving behind people who loved him. But I needed to know him, Mom. I needed people who could tell me stories and show me who he was when he wasn't just being my dad. You took that from me. You made that choice for me without asking what I needed." Carol wiped her eyes, her voice defensive. "I was doing the best I could. I was grieving too. I lost my husband. I was angry and scared, and I didn't know how to process any of it except to cut away everything that reminded me of what happened. But I wasn't you," Jennifer said quietly. "I was a child who lost her father and needed to hold on to him any way I could. And you decided that your grief was more important than mine, that your need to forget was more important than my need to remember." The silence between them was heavy with 3 decades of unspoken resentment, of grief that had been processed differently, of choices that couldn't be unmade. Finally, Carol spoke, her voice small. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to the Sierra Kings clubhouse on Sunday. I'm going to meet Dad's brothers. I'm going to hear the stories you wouldn't tell me. I'm going to learn about the man he was beyond the 8 years I got with him." Jennifer picked up the photograph. "And you can either accept that or not, but I'm done letting your fear control my connection to my father." She left her mother sitting in that pristine living room, left without reconciliation or resolution, because some wounds were too old and too deep to heal in a single conversation. But as Jennifer drove home, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like she was moving toward something instead of away from it, like she was claiming something that had always belonged to her, but had been kept just out of reach. Sunday arrived with the kind of crystalline autumn morning that made Northern California feel like the most beautiful place on earth. Jennifer drove to Auburn with her stomach twisted in knots, equal parts anticipation and terror. She'd spent 30 years not knowing these people, and now she was about to walk into a room full of her father's brothers who'd been frozen in time for her, who existed only in stories and old photographs. The Sierra Kings clubhouse was exactly what she'd expected, and nothing like she'd imagined. It was a converted garage on the outskirts of Auburn, with motorcycles lined up outside and a hand-painted sign that read, "Sierra Kings MC Established, 1981. The building was weathered but well maintained, surrounded by pine trees that dropped needles across the gravel parking area. As Jennifer pulled in, she could see men gathering outside, watching her arrival. She stepped out of her car and Torch was there immediately, walking toward her with a smile that was both welcoming and cautious. "You came. I said I would." "Yeah, but people say a lot of things. Doing them is different." He gestured toward the clubhouse. "Everyone's here. All the original members who knew your dad, plus some younger brothers who've heard the stories their whole lives. They're all excited to meet you, but they're also nervous. They don't want to overwhelm you or push too hard." "I want to know everything," Jennifer said. "I want to hear it all." Torch nodded and led her inside. The clubhouse interior was exactly what a motorcycle club sanctuary should be. Worn leather furniture, a bar along one wall, a pool table in the corner, and walls covered with photographs and memorabilia from decades of brotherhood. And there, prominently displayed above the bar, was a large framed photograph of her father in his Sierra King's vest, grinning at the camera with that infectious smile she remembered from childhood. Jennifer stopped walking, staring at that image. She'd had no photographs of her father for 30 years. Her mother had disposed of everything, and here he was, larger than life, memorialized by people who refused to let him be forgotten. "We've kept him here," a voice said from behind her. Jennifer turned to see Bear approaching, even more massive in person than he'd seemed at the gas station. "We've kept all our fallen brothers here. But Hammer, your dad, he's special. He was one of the originals, one of the founding members when we started this club in 1981. Over the next 4 hours, Jennifer sat surrounded by aging bikers who took turns telling her about David Hammer Caldwell. They told her about how he'd gotten his road name, earned it by being able to fix anything mechanical with nothing but a hammer and stubborn determination. They told her about his years in the Navy, his service on a destroyer in the Pacific, his transition to civilian life, and the struggle to find purpose after military structure disappeared. They told her about how he'd met her mother at a county fair in 1983, how he'd fallen hard and fast, how he'd proposed after 3 months and married her after 6. They told her about his joy when Jennifer was born in 1986, how he'd carried her picture everywhere, how he'd bored everyone with stories about his daughter's first words and first steps and every milestone she achieved. Copper told her about teaching her father to ride, about the first time David had gotten on a motorcycle and instantly understood the freedom and clarity that came from 2 wheels and open road. Snake, a quiet man with silver hair and gentle eyes, told her about the charity work the club had done, how her father had been passionate about helping veterans transition to civilian life, how he'd spent weekends volunteering at the VA hospital. Wheels, the oldest member at 68, his legs damaged from an old accident that had left him unable to ride anymore, told her about the night her father died, the story her mother had never shared, the details that had been kept from her for 3 decades. "We were riding back from a run to Reno," Wheels said quietly. 7 of us. It was late, maybe 11 at night, and we were on Highway 50 coming through the foothills. Your dad was riding second in formation right behind Torch. There was a truck coming the other way, a semi, and the driver fell asleep at the wheel. The truck crossed the center line and came straight at us. Jennifer's hands were clenched in her lap, her breathing shallow, but she didn't interrupt. Torch swerved right to avoid it, made it to the shoulder. But your dad, he saw that the truck was going to hit Bear and Copper who were riding behind him, so instead of following Torch to safety, he swerved left, directly into the truck's path, and laid his bike down. The sound and the light from his bike going down made the truck driver wake up and jerk back into his lane. Bear and Copper survived. The truck missed them by inches. But your dad, the impact killed him instantly. Wheel's voice broke. He sacrificed himself to save his brothers. That was who your father was. He saw danger coming for people he loved, and he put himself between them and harm without hesitation. Jennifer was crying, but these weren't tears of fresh grief. They were tears of finally understanding, of having the gaps filled in, of knowing that her father's death hadn't been reckless or meaningless, but had been the ultimate act of brotherhood and love. Bear leaned forward, his massive frame somehow gentle. "I've lived 30 years that should have been his. I raised 3 kids, saw them graduate, held my grandchildren. Every good thing in my life since that night exists because your father gave his life for mine. I think about that every single day. I honor that every single day." "We all do," Torch said quietly. "That's why we got the Phoenix tattoos. Because your dad rose up in that moment and became something more than human. He became the kind of brother legends are made of, and we wanted to carry that forward." Jennifer looked around the room at these men, most in their 60s now, weathered and scarred and carrying 3 decades of memory. They'd kept her father alive in stories and photographs and memorial rides. They'd honored him in ways her mother never could. "Why didn't you fight harder?" Jennifer asked. "When Mom cut you off, why didn't you push back? Why didn't you go to court or find a way to stay in my life?" Torch sighed. "We thought about it. Had lawyers tell us we might have a case, that as your father's brothers we could argue for some kind of visitation. But ultimately, we decided that putting you in the middle of a legal battle between your mother and us would hurt you more than help you. We thought maybe when you were older, when you were an adult, you'd come looking for us. We just had to wait and hope." "And I did," Jennifer said. "It took 30 years and a chance encounter at a gas station, but I found you." The Sierra Kings members shared stories for the rest of the afternoon. They showed Jennifer her father's old vest, preserved in a glass case, his patches and pins exactly as they'd been the night he died. They gave her copies of photographs, dozens of them, images of her father at club events and charity rides and casual gatherings. They showed her letters he'd written, planning documents for club activities, even a journal he'd kept during his Navy years. One of the younger members, a man named Axel, who'd joined the club 10 years ago, spoke up. "I never met your father, but I know him through the stories. Every new member who prospects for Sierra Kings hears about Hammer, about his sacrifice, his loyalty, his joy. He's part of our foundation. He's why we hold ourselves to a higher standard." Jennifer realized that her father hadn't just been remembered. He'd been immortalized. His legacy had shaped this club for 3 decades, had influenced men who'd never met him, had created a standard of brotherhood that continued to define them. Before she left that afternoon, Torch took her aside. "We'd like to do something, if you're comfortable with it. Every year on the anniversary of Hammer's death, we do a memorial ride. We ride the same route he died on, stop at the site where it happened, and honor him. This year will be the 30th anniversary. We'd like you to ride with us if you want. Not on a bike if you're not comfortable with that, but in a support vehicle. We want you there when we honor your father." Jennifer felt something shift in her chest. 30 years of her mother's fear and protection and forced separation, and here were men asking her to be part of the ritual that honored the man she'd lost. "When is it?" "November 17th. Same date as the accident. We gather at dawn, ride out together, spend the day remembering Hammer and all our fallen brothers." "I'll be there," Jennifer said without hesitation. The following weeks brought changes that rippled through Jennifer's carefully constructed life. She began meeting regularly with the Sierra Kings, attending club events, listening to more stories, asking questions she'd carried for 3 decades. The club's old ladies, the wives and girlfriends of members, welcomed her with the warmth of women who understood that family could be chosen and the connection to the past mattered. Her mother called several times, their conversations stilted and painful. Carol couldn't understand why Jennifer was choosing to engage with the world that had taken her father. Jennifer couldn't understand how her mother still failed to see that keeping her from that world had been a different kind of loss. They existed in uneasy detente, their relationship damaged in ways that might never fully heal. But Jennifer was healing in other ways. She learned that her father had been funny and irreverent, that he'd had a terrible singing voice but sang anyway, that he'd been fierce in his loyalties and gentle in his affections. She learned that he'd struggled with PTSD from his Navy service, that the motorcycle club had been his therapy, that the brotherhood had given him purpose when civilian life felt empty. She learned that she was like him in ways she'd never known. Her stubbornness came from him. Her sense of justice came from him. Her need to protect people she loved came from him. The parts of herself she'd never understood suddenly made sense when she saw them reflected in stories about her father. November 17th arrived cold and clear, the kind of mountain morning where frost painted the landscape silver and breath turned to clouds. Jennifer arrived at the Sierra Kings clubhouse before dawn to find 32 motorcycles already assembled, engines rumbling in the darkness. Members from other chapters had come, men who'd known her father or who knew his legend, all gathering to honor a brother who'd died 3 decades ago. Torch helped Jennifer into the support vehicle, a pickup truck that would follow the riders. Bear's wife Elena sat beside her, a woman who'd been married to Bear for 28 years and who'd spent all that time grateful to a man she'd never met. "Your father gave me my husband," Elena said quietly as they waited for the riders to organize. "He gave me my life. I never got to thank him, but I can honor him by making sure his daughter knows she's loved." The ride to the accident site took an hour, 32 motorcycles moving in tight formation through the foothills as the sun rose over the Sierra Nevada. They pulled off Highway 50 at a specific point, a scenic turnout that had been unremarkable 30 years ago, but was now marked with a small memorial. A simple stone marker that read, "David Hammer Caldwell, Sierra Kings MC, 1958 to 1994, brother, father, hero." Jennifer hadn't known the marker existed. The club had installed it years ago, had maintained it, had stopped here every year to pay their respects. She stood before it now, surrounded by men in leather who removed their helmets and bowed their heads in respect. Torch spoke, his voice carrying in the mountain air. 30 years ago today, we lost our brother Hammer. He died, saving Bear and Copper, putting their lives ahead of his own, making the choice that defined who he was. We gather here every year to remember him, to honor him, to make sure he's never forgotten. And this year, for the first time, we have his daughter with us. Jennifer, we want you to know that your father's legacy didn't die with him. It lives in every member of this club. It lives in the standard we hold ourselves to. It lives in you. Each member stepped forward and placed something at the memorial: flowers, photographs, coins, small tokens of respect. When it was Jennifer's turn, she placed a letter she'd written, words she'd needed to say to a father who'd been gone for 3 decades, words about missing him, about finally knowing him, about gratitude for the sacrifice that had defined his final moment. The riders stood in silence for long minutes, the only sound the wind moving through the pines and the distant rush of traffic on the highway below. Then they mounted their bikes and rode on, continuing the memorial route that ended at a small cafe in Placerville where they gathered for breakfast and more stories. Jennifer sat surrounded by her father's brothers and their families, listening to laughter and remembrances, feeling for the first time in 30 years like she belonged to something larger than herself, like she was part of a legacy that extended backward to her father's sacrifice and forward to whatever she chose to make of it. In the months that followed, Jennifer became a regular presence at Sierra Kings events. She helped with their annual toy drive, contributed to their Veterans Assistance Program, attended club barbecues and gatherings. She learned to ride a motorcycle, taking lessons from Copper, who taught her with the same patience he'd shown her father 40 years earlier. And when she finally got her license, the club presented her with a vest. Not a full member vest, which she'd have to earn through prospecting, but a family vest that identified her as Hammer's daughter, as protected and claimed by the Sierra Kings. On her 39th birthday, Jennifer arrived at the clubhouse to find 5 members waiting for her: Torch, Bear, Copper, Snake, and Wheels, the 5 who'd gotten the Phoenix tattoos 30 years ago. They gave her an envelope. Inside was a gift certificate to a tattoo parlor in Sacramento, along with a photograph of her father's Phoenix and a note that read, "If you want it, we'll go with you. 6 Phoenixes for 6 people who carry Hammer forward." Jennifer looked at these men who'd loved her father, who'd waited 30 years to know her, who'd kept his memory alive when everyone else had tried to bury it. She thought about her mother's fear and control, about the careful life she'd built that had kept her safe, but also kept her disconnected. And she thought about the choice her father had made in his final seconds, to swerve toward danger instead of away from it, to save his brothers at the cost of his own life. "When can we go?" she asked. 3 weeks later, Jennifer sat in a tattoo chair while an artist carefully replicated the phoenix that had marked her father's arm. Torch, Bear, Copper, Snake, and Wheels sat with her, showing their matching tattoos, telling stories about the day they'd gotten them, about Carlo the artist who'd broken his own rule to honor a fallen brother. When it was finished, Jennifer looked at the phoenix on her forearm, the exact design her father had worn, the image that had brought her back to his brotherhood. She thought about resurrection and renewal, about rising from ashes, about how sometimes the worst losses could transform into unexpected connections if you were brave enough to let them. The story of Jennifer and the Phoenix tattoo became part of Sierra King's lore, added to the tales they told new prospects about what brotherhood meant. It was a reminder that legacy survived death, that bonds could transcend decades of separation, that family could be reclaimed even after being deliberately severed. It was proof that some tattoos were more than ink, that some symbols carried weight beyond decoration, that sometimes a chance encounter at a gas station could unravel 30 years of secrets and restore what should never have been lost. Jennifer's relationship with her mother never fully healed. Carol couldn't accept her daughter's choice to embrace the world that had taken her husband. But Jennifer found she could live with that, could accept that her mother's grief had manifested as control, and that some wounds were too old to fully mend. What mattered was that she'd found her father again, not in memory that faded, but in living connection to the brotherhood that had defined him. She rode with the Sierra Kings on memorial runs and charity events, her Phoenix tattoo visible on her arm, her father's legacy literally written on her skin. She told her students about the importance of knowing where you came from, about honoring the people who shaped you, about not letting fear prevent connection. And every November 17th, she stood at that roadside memorial with 30 or 40 bikers, honoring a man who died before she was old enough to truly know him, but who she understood completely now through the brothers who'd refused to forget. Because that was the truth the Phoenix tattoo had revealed, that some bonds survived even deliberate separation. That brotherhood extended to the children of fallen members, protecting and honoring them across decades. That legacy lived not in what you left behind, but in who remembered you and how they chose to carry you forward. That sometimes the most important thing you could do was see an impossible image on a stranger's arm and have the courage to ask how it got there, because that question might lead you home to a family you'd never known you had, to stories that filled the gaps in your history, to a father who'd been kept from you but who'd never really been gone at all. If this story reminded you that family can be found in unexpected places, that legacy lives through the people who refuse to forget, and that sometimes the courage to ask a single question can transform your understanding of who you are and where you came from, share it with someone who needs to know that connection is possible even across decades of separation. Subscribe for more stories that prove brotherhood transcends death, that children of fallen members deserve to know their parents' full stories, and that sometimes the most important inheritance isn't what's given to you, but what you have the courage to reclaim.